What's up, YouTube friends? Now it's spring cleaning time here in the sewing room, and it can be a pretty daunting task. At least once a year I like to go through my scrap bin, which is right over there, and I like to cut those scraps up into usable pieces. Now pieces like this, I just like to square up and leave whole. If I have any wide strips like this, I just like to cut them down to 2.5-inch strips and throw them in another basket. And pieces like this where I really can't get any usable chunks out of this, I go ahead and cut them up into smaller pieces and throw them in a pillowcase and use it as a pet bed. But that's an upcoming video. And I also like to cut my fabric up into 4.5-inch squares. Now that's what I use to make this bath mat here, and that's what I'm going to show you how to make today. Now I decided that I did not like this one anymore. There's nothing wrong with it, I'm just tired of staring at it, so I'm going to make myself a new one. Now as you can see, I used an old bath towel for the backing here, and I also have batting in between. Now I believe I used another towel here as the batting, and I don't recommend it unless you're going to use one of those really cheap thin towels that you can get at the Dollar Tree or something like that. So I'll show you how easy it is to make this Scrappy Patch bath mat next. So the things that you're going to need to make this bath mat are an old towel. Now as you can see, this one has some bleach stains on it. It's fraying at the edges, so this will be perfect. You're also going to need some sort of batting. Today I'll just be using this flannel. And as you can see, this is a perfect way to use up some scraps. All I did was go ahead and serge 2 pieces together, and it'll be perfect. Now you could just use a low loft batting if you wanted to, or like I said, a thin, cheap towel. You're going to need 48 squares of fabric, and these just happen to measure 4.5 inches square. Now my finished bath mat is going to measure roughly 23 inches by 31 inches, but you could go ahead and make this as long and as wide as you like. You just need to add more squares or take more squares away. You're also going to need your iron and ironing board and sewing machine with thread. Let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and cut out my squares. Now I have some cut out here already, and like I said, I'm going to cut these out to 4.5 inches squared, and the only reason why I'm using 4.5 inches is because that's the size of my square ruler. Now I went ahead and I went through my scrap box and I grabbed 48 different pieces of fabric. And as you can see here, I really don't care what the fabric is. I have some Valentine's Day fabric over here, Halloween fabric, superhero fabric, Easter fabric, and of course, I have some camo. So now I'm just going to stack up about 4 layers of fabric. I don't like to do more than 4 layers because then your sides will get kind of wonky. And using my square ruler with my rotary cutter, I'm just going to cut it out. Now don't throw away these tiny scraps. In an upcoming video, I'll show you just what you can do with these. So now I'm just going to continue to cut out these squares until I get 48. So now that I have my 48 squares here all cut out, we're going to lay out this bath mat. Now this is going to be 6 squares wide by 8 squares long. And so I just like to start and throw them down randomly. Alright guys, so it's all laid out, so now it's time to sew it together. Now when I did lay this out, the only thing I was mindful of was that there wasn't like 2 colors touching. For example, I didn't want red next to red. I also made sure that the really graphic prints, like the Valentine's one, the superhero ones, stuff like that, even the camos, were spread out evenly throughout the top. I also didn't care what direction my prints were facing. This is Scrappy after all. So now I'm just going to take this first row here, and I'm just going to stack one on top of the other. So now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine. I'm going to take the top one, I'm going to lay it face up, then I'll take the second one and I'll lay it face down. Then I'll go ahead and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and when I open it up, then I know that the third one will go right here. So I'm going to do that to all 8 rows. Alright, so I'm over here at my sewing machine. Today I'll be using a straight stitch. My length is a 2. Now I have white thread up here at the top, but for the bobbin, this is the perfect time to use up all those half-used bobbins. Now, like I said, the first fabric on my stack is on the bottom facing up. The second one on the stack is facing down. So I'll be using 1/4 inch seam allowance, and just so. Now you do not have to backstitch at this time. So now I just laid my third piece of fabric from my stack with pretty sides touching on the second piece. And just so. Now I'm going to continue to do that until all 8 strips are done. So I have all 8 of my strips here all sewed together. The next thing we're going to want to do is give it a good press. Now with this first one, I'm going to press all the seams up. On the second one, I'm going to press them all down. And I'm going to continue to do that on all 8 strips. That way when we go to sew our strips together, our seams will nestle up and lock nicely. Alright, so now that I have all my seams pressed in opposite directions here, I'm going to take my second strip and I'm going to lay it over my first strip. So now I'm just going to match up every seam here, and because we pressed them in different ways, they'll lock together nicely and stick a pin. Now that I have every seam here pinned together and nestled, I'm going to go ahead and take this over to my sewing machine, and with that same 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew all the way down the side. So once I get this set all sewed together, then I'll go ahead and do the same thing with this set, and the final set. I'll go ahead and press them, and then I'll continue to sew them together until it's all complete. I'll bring it back when it's all finished. Alright, so once I had my top all sewed together, I gave it a really good press. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and cut our towel and our batting down to size. So now I'm just going to grab my batting and I'm going to lay that on top. Center my top on top of that. And with my ruler and my rotary cutter, I'm just going to cut it out the same size as my topper. Alright, so I have all 3 pieces cut out to the same size. So now I'm just going to take my towel, and whatever side you want to be the back that's going to show, you want that facing up. Next, I'm going to line up my topper here with my towel, and I want it face down. Then you want to take your batting and lay that on top also. And just smooth everything out nicely. Now if you join 2 pieces together like I did here, I don't want the seam here facing my fabric. Now I'm just going to go ahead and throw in some pins through all 3 layers. So first I went ahead and I just put a few here in the middle just so nothing moves. And then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to pin about a 4 or 5 inch opening down here at the bottom. And that'll be just for turning our bath mat when we're done sewing it together. So now I'm just going to throw a few more pins here along the side also. Now that I have it all pinned together and secure, I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and using that straight stitch, I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to sew with probably a 3/4 inch seam allowance. I want a nice thick seam allowance. I'm going to sew all the way around, and don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. So now using this chopstick here, I'm just going to go ahead and poke out all the corners and make sure my seam here between the towel and my top is nice and flat. So now I'm just going to take this over to my ironing board and I'm going to give it a nice press. Now I just want to make sure that this seam right here, that the towel isn't showing and it's at the bottom as best I can. And right here at our opening, I'm just going to give it a little tug and it'll close right up, and make sure that's nice and pressed and I'll throw a couple pins in there. So now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine, and using that same straight stitch with the length of a 3, I'm going to top stitch all the way around. Now I'll be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance for my top stitch. And right here at my opening, I threw in a couple pins here, and I really want to make sure that I catch that fabric and close that opening. And as always, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Alright guys, so I finished top stitching this with my 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you could just stop right here and be good. But I'm going to quilt this together a little bit. So to do that, I'm going to stitch in the ditch. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to backstitch where this seam matches the top stitch that we just made. And I'm going to sew in the ditch all the way down until I get to my seam right here. I'm going to travel stitch till I get to this seam and stitch down, and continue to do that all the way around. Now when I get to this corner here, I'm going to travel stitch up, over, and then do the same thing with my vertical seams. Backstitching at the end when I get right down to here. Alright, so I'm still using a straight stitch, of course, and my length is still a 3. Now I put my needle down right where my top stitch came along with this seam right here. So I'm going to backstitch. And then I'm just going to carefully sew all the way down this line. Now if you do happen to go on one side or the other, it's okay, because once we get this washed, it'll puff up a little bit and you won't even see it. Now when I'm sewing along here, I'm just making sure that everything is nice and flat, especially with the towel. But if it does happen to get a little pucker in it like that, once we wash it, like I said, you won't even see it. Alright guys, so I'm coming up to my top stitch line here. So I'm going to stop right on the line. I have my needle down. I'm going to turn and spin. And then I'm just going to follow that top stitch line until I get to my next seam here. Needle down, spin, and just keep sewing. Now I'm just going to continue to do that until all my horizontal and my vertical lines are all quilted. So now I have it all quilted together, and I think it turned out great. I definitely won't get bored with these new fabrics when I'm getting out of the shower. Now here's the back. You probably can't see the quilting at all since I did use white. I hope this gives you some inspiration and that you go dig through your scrap bin and give this project a try. If you like this project and want to see more of my projects, go down below and hit the big red subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. If you'd like to be notified as to when I post one of my videos, hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button. If you have a question about this video or any of my other videos, or would like to just leave a suggestion for a future upcoming video, leave me a comment. Feel free to share this video across your social medias. If you'd like to share projects and pictures of your crafts, head on over to Scrappy's Patch and hit the friend button. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.